The girl's eyes never left his hands. Marcus Holloway counted out the $23 in silver, each coin catching lamplight as it hit the saloon table. Across from him, Jake Brennan swayed like a broken fence post, whiskey fumes rolling off him in waves. Between them sat a slip of a girl, maybe 16, with dirt-streaked cheeks and a dress that had seen too many winters. "She ain't much to look at," Brennan slurred, "but she works hard, real hard, just can't hear worth a damn." The girl's gaze flicked to Brennan's mouth when he spoke, then back to Marcus's hands. Her father, if that's what you called a man who'd gamble away his own blood, had been talking for 10 minutes about her like she wasn't sitting right there. But those dark eyes of hers tracked every gesture, every movement of lips. Marcus had come to Deadwood for cattle, not complications. His ranch 20 miles south needed hands for the spring roundup, and desperation had driven him to consider Brennan's drunken offer. A girl sold to cover gambling debts. The whole thing left a taste in his mouth worse than week-old coffee. "What's her name?" Marcus asked. "Sarah," Brennan said, not looking at her. "Sarah May. Been deaf since she was little. Fever took her hearing, but left her strong enough to work." The girl, Sarah, shifted in her chair. Her fingers moved in quick, silent patterns against her leg. Marcus had seen similar gestures once before, years ago, when he'd worked alongside a deaf ranch hand in Colorado. Sign language, the man had called it, a way to speak without words. But something didn't sit right. When the saloon door had slammed earlier, Sarah had flinched. When the piano player hit a sour note, her shoulders had tensed. And now, as Brennan counted the coins a second time, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a whisper, Sarah's jaw tightened. "Deal?" Brennan extended a dirt-soaked hand. Marcus studied the girl's face. Fear lived there, sure enough, but something else too. Intelligence, calculation, like she was listening to more than just the silence everyone assumed surrounded her. He pushed the money across the table. The moment their skin touched, Sarah's eyes snapped to his. For just an instant he saw something flicker there, recognition, maybe even relief. But then her expression went blank again, empty as a shuttered window. Outside, thunder rolled across the Montana sky. The ride to the Double H Ranch passed in uncomfortable silence. Sarah rode behind Marcus on his bay gelding, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. Every few miles, he'd glance back to check on her, but she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, face unreadable as stone. By the time they reached the ranch house, word had already spread. Marcus's foreman, Tom Carver, waited on the porch with crossed arms and a deep frown. "Heard tell you bought yourself some company in town," Tom said, his voice carrying the disapproval of a man who'd known Marcus since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. "Girl needs work, ranch needs hands." Marcus dismounted, then helped Sarah down. She landed light as a cat, immediately stepping back to maintain distance. "She's just a child, Marcus, and deaf from what I hear. What use is she gonna be?" Sarah's head turned sharply toward Tom, though she kept her expression neutral. Marcus noticed how her breathing changed, shallower, more controlled, like she was working to hide something. "Everyone deserves a chance," Marcus said. "Get her settled in the spare room upstairs. Tomorrow we'll see what she can do." That evening, Marcus sat on his porch, wrestling with doubt. Through the kitchen window, he could see Sarah washing dishes, her movements efficient and practiced. Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch had stopped by with a basket of beef, read and enough gossip to choke a horse. "Buying girls now, are we?" she'd said, her voice dripping disapproval. "What will folks think?" What would folks think? In a territory where reputation meant everything, where a man's word was his bond and his character his currency, Marcus had just made himself the subject of every whispered conversation from here to Miles City. A bachelor rancher taking in a young girl, deaf or not, would raise eyebrows and worse. But it was more than local gossip eating at him. Something about Sarah didn't add up. The way she'd positioned herself during their conversation with Tom, angled so she could see both men's faces. The way she'd known exactly where to find the dishes without being shown. The way she'd jumped when he had accidentally knocked over a tin cup in the kitchen, then quickly pretended she hadn't noticed. Late that night, Marcus heard footsteps creaking across the floorboards above. Soft, careful steps that paused outside his door before continuing down the hallway. He lay still, listening to the sounds of someone who clearly knew how to move quietly through a house. The next morning brought visitors, 3 men on horseback, dust-covered and hard-looking. Marcus recognized the type, bounty hunters or close enough. They asked about strangers, about anyone new in the area. Their leader, a scarred man named Pike, described a runaway girl. "Reward's $50, Pike said. "Good money for information." Through the kitchen window, Marcus caught a glimpse of Sarah's face. Pure terror. The men made camp a mile downriver. Marcus found Sarah in the barn that afternoon, mucking stalls with desperate intensity. Sweat beaded her forehead despite the cool spring air, and her hands shook as she worked. "They're looking for someone," he said quietly. Sarah continued shoveling manure, but her shoulders went rigid. "Girl about your age, girl who might have run away from somewhere." Marcus leaned against the stall door. "Girl who might be pretending to be something she's not." The shovel stilled in Sarah's hands. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she turned to face him. The careful blankness was gone from her expression, replaced by raw desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please don't let them take me back." The sound of her voice hit Marcus like a physical blow. Clear, unbroken, perfectly normal. She could hear. She could speak. Everything had been a lie. "How long?" he asked. "Since I was 12. The words came out in a rush, like water through a broken dam. He sold me to a man in Dakota Territory. Said I was old enough to earn my keep. But Cyrus Webb, what he wanted." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I learned to pretend I couldn't hear, couldn't speak. Men like that, they want you to scream. When you don't react, when you can't, sometimes they lose interest." Thunder rolled overhead, and Sarah flinched at the sound, the first honest reaction Marcus had seen from her. "I ran 3 months ago. Been moving ever since, town to town, pretending to be deaf and mute so no one would remember me. Your friend's father, he was drunk enough to believe it." "Brennan's not my friend," Marcus said grimly. "And Webb? He sent those men?" Sarah nodded. $50 is more than most folks see in a year. They'll search every ranch, every farm, and when they find me—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Hoofbeats echoed across the valley. Through the barn door, Marcus could see Pike and his men riding toward the house. Sarah grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in like claws. "I can disappear," she whispered frantically. "Tonight, after they leave. You never saw me. You don't know anything about—" "No." The word came out harder than Marcus intended. "No more running!" Pike's voice carried across the yard, calling for Marcus to come out and talk. Sarah's face went white as fresh snow. "They'll kill you too if you stand in their way," she breathed. Marcus checked his Colt, the weight of it familiar and reassuring against his hip. "Let them try." "Stay here," Marcus told Sarah, but she followed him to the barn door anyway, pressing herself against the frame where she could see but not be seen. Pike sat his horse like a man comfortable with violence. His 2 companions flanked him, hands resting casual-like on their gun butts. Tom Carver had emerged from the bunkhouse, rifle in hand, reading the situation like the old soldier he was. "Afternoon, Holloway," Pike called. "Mind if we water our horses? Long ride from town." "Help yourself," Marcus replied, "but make it quick. Got work to do." Pike swung down from his saddle, his movements deliberately slow. "Heard you took on some help recently. Girl from town. We'd like a word with her." "Girl's deaf and mute," Marcus said. "Don't think you'll get much conversation." "Oh, we got ways of making folks comment." "Kate." Pike's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Where is she?" Behind him, Marcus heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath. He could feel her terror, like heat from a forge, but he kept his voice level. "Send her to town for supplies this morning. Won't be back till evening." It was a gamble. Pike would either believe the lie and move on, or call his bluff and search the ranch. The silence stretched like a taut rope, broken only by the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. Then Pike nodded. "We'll wait." The afternoon crawled by like a wounded animal. Pike's men made themselves comfortable, watering their horses, sharing tobacco, keeping their eyes on every shadow and doorway. Marcus continued his daily routine, checking cattle, mending fence, all while acutely aware of Sarah hidden in the barn loft. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Pike's patience wore thin. "Mighty long trip to town for a deaf girl," he observed, lighting a fresh cigarette. "Gave her a list," Marcus replied. "Takes time when you can't ask questions." It was then that Sarah made her choice. She emerged from the barn, walking with the careful, measured steps of someone navigating a world without sound. Her face was blank, eyes unfocused, the perfect picture of a girl trapped in silence. Pike straightened, his hand moving to his gun. Well, Look what we got here. Sarah approached slowly, her gaze never quite meeting anyone's eyes. She carried a basket of eggs, playing her part to perfection. When Pike stepped into her path, she stopped, tilting her head in confusion. This her? Pike asked Marcus, but his eyes never left Sarah. That's her, Sarah Mae Brennan. Pike waved a hand in front of Sarah's face. She didn't react. He snapped his fingers near her ear. Nothing. Then he leaned close and whispered something vile, something that would have made any normal girl recoil in disgust. Sarah just stood there, patient and empty-eyed. For a moment, doubt flickered across Pike's scarred features. Then he stepped back, spat in the dirt. Ain't her, he growled to his men. Girl we want's got fire in her. This one's just, he gestured dismissively, broken. The three men rode out just as the last light faded from the western sky, their horses' hoofbeats gradually swallowed by distance and darkness. Marcus and Sarah stood in the yard long after the sound disappeared, neither speaking, both afraid to break the spell that had saved her life. Finally, Sarah's shoulders sagged, and she let out a breath that seemed to contain months of held tension. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the growing dark. Don't thank me yet, Marcus replied. They'll be back. Maybe not those three, but others. Webb's not the type to give up easy. Sarah nodded, accepting the truth of it. Then I should go. Tonight, before... No. Marcus turned to face her fully. You said you've been running for 3 months. Where's it? Gotten you? Another close call, another narrow escape. Eventually, your luck runs out. Then what? Sarah's voice cracked with exhaustion. I can't fight him. I can't... We fight him, Tom Carver said, emerging from the shadows where he had been standing guard. Webb's got legal papers, sure enough, but papers don't mean much when a man's got witnesses to testify about what really happened. Marcus studied his foreman's weather for. You heard? Heard enough. Tom spat into the dirt. Had a daughter once. Same age as Sarah here. Would have killed any man who laid a hand on her. His voice went quiet. Indians got her and my wife in '74, but if they hadn't, I'd want someone to stand up for her the way we're going to stand up for this girl. Over the following weeks, the truth emerged like water finding its way through stone. Other girls came forward, young women who had escaped Webb's employment, with stories that made strong men sick to their stomachs. A circuit judge, honest enough to listen and brave enough to act, issued warrants. Webb, faced with testimony from a dozen victims and the prospect of a Colorado rope, took the coward's way out with a bottle of laudanum in a Denver hotel room. Pike and his men found other work. There was always someone willing to pay for violence, but their particular contract had ended with their employer's death. Spring turned to summer on the Double H Ranch. Sarah's hearing returned gradually, not the physical ability, which had never truly left her, but the willingness to acknowledge that sound, to respond to her name when called, to laugh at Tom's terrible jokes around the evening fire. She learned to ride, to rope, to read the weather in the color of the western sky. More importantly, she learned to sleep without nightmares, to speak without fear, to trust that tomorrow would come without bringing fresh terrors. Years later, when Sarah Oates had become the finest horse trainer in 3 counties, when she'd married young Doc Patterson and raised 2 children who never knew want or fear, she would remember that first night on the Double H Ranch, how Marcus Holloway had stood between her and the darkness, not because he owed her anything, but because it was right. And sometimes, on clear evenings when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, she would look west toward the mountains and remember what it felt like to be truly heard for the first time in her life, not with ears, but with something deeper than sound could ever reach. The silence that had once been her prison had become, in the end, the very thing that taught her the true meaning of home.